All right, Mick, you're going to finish her up here. I'm really excited Mick was able to come and do this. I personally, I really think that winter canola can be a huge potential crop for us in this area. Mick's been working on it for what, 10 years now, Mick? Probably close to it. Yeah. So he's kind of seen everything. He's a real wealth of knowledge. Can kind of just, he's going to cover agronomy to everything there. And hopefully you have some questions for him at the end. So.
Thanks, Cody. Cody and I go way back. We probably don't want to talk about how we first met, but probably in a single wide trailer in Havre over some barley pops a handful of years ago. But I'm from Fairfield, Montana, hayseed from Fairfield, Montana, born and raised, haven't left, been with Winfield United and representing the Croplan brand for 12 years now. Went to school in Havre where I had the opportunity to meet Cody. We've had a good relationship over the years. We haven't done, I would say, a lot of business together, but Cody was always the guy that I'd hear from once a year that would ask me a challenging question if I thought it was crazy or not. And most of the times I would say it was crazy and he would do it anyway. So I was glad to have the opportunity to speak today. I don't know how I can follow up the docs conversation, but the only thing that I have going for me is I'm between you guys and the drawing of that Chevy pickup. So bear with me. We'll get through this. So he gave me the opportunity to talk about canola, and I really think there's an awesome opportunity here. Why winter canola? How many of you know what you're going to plant here come the next 2 months for a spring crop? Everybody have their cropping plan pretty well figured out. I think there's a lot of uncertainty still out there. Most of us are all small grain producers, me coming from the malt barley capital of the world. Rotation can be very difficult for some of us producers in the Fairfield area. And there's a lot of opportunity, I still think, even in a down market. I know Carson showed the price indexes of 2026 compared to 2025. Most of them are down, but some of the silver linings are in oil seeds. If you've seen flax, you've seen canola. If you start going to the Dakotas, sunflowers still look really good on a crop budget sheet. So I would look very seriously at canola as maybe an opportunity on your operation. I'm specifically going to talk winter canola. If anybody wants to talk spring canola, feel free to grab me at the end. But some questions I like to ask at the beginning is, why do we raise winter wheat where we raise winter wheat currently today? If winter wheat is better in the winter wheat zone, why wouldn't winter canola be better versus spring canola is being grown? And what impacts on your farm would it have having another winter crop or a late summer crop as well? So why winter canola? Obviously, always profitability is big. Where's it going to come at on a crop budget sheet? But rotational value, I know there's still a lot of acres. There's still acres here in this room that the only rotation we have on that farm outside of small grains is typically fallow. Have you ever raised a pulse crop, a brassica crop on those acres and seen what it did in terms of rotational benefits? Most of the university data suggests you'll see at least a 10 to 25%. I've seen anywhere from a 10 to 50% increase in your small grains following canola. One thing with winter canola is just like winter wheat, we're taking advantage of early season moisture, cooler temperatures. It's going to flower early. We're talking the end of May going into June. We beat the heat of the summer, just the reason why we raise winter wheat versus spring wheat in a lot of the acres of Montana. One thing with canola, it's a flowering, indeterminate crop. Those flowers, those yellow flowers that you see, they actually are very temperature sensitive, stress sensitive. Most of the university data suggests that those pollinating flowers will disrupt and close at anything over 82.5 degrees Fahrenheit. What do we have a lot of temperature in June and July is the last couple of years have been 90s and 100s plus. What we're doing is disrupting that pollinating period of that crop, adding stress to that crop and losing yield opportunity there. Winter canola gives you an opportunity to flower early, be done early before the stresses of the season. A lot of it also, when we talk about profitability, if we're trying to compare yield to what we're currently doing for winter wheat on those same acres, most of that is your winter canola is typically going to yield 75 to 95% that of your winter wheat on those same acres. One thing that's really neat, there's a lot newer genetics. I think Neil talked earlier about genetics and how they've come the last 30 years. Same thing with winter canola. If you look at canola acres across the US or across North America, there's 24 million acres. 22 million of those canola acres are in Canada. 2 million of those acres are in the US. Of that 2 million acres, about 100,000 of that is winter canola, and we used to have almost 350,000 acres of winter canola in the US, and that was predominantly the Southern Plains. There was a big crush facility that was purchasing a lot of that, big winter wheat area as well. Most of the genetics were bred for that Southern Plains market. Crush facility in Kansas closed up back in 2013 to 2015, and most seed companies exited the business at that point in terms of winter canola. We wanted to figure out a reason or a way to keep winter canola alive and keep that market viable. So we actually, you've seen the industry breed for winter hardiness, and that's where you see winter canola here the last 10 years in Montana with these newer genetics. So winter canola versus spring canola, I took this photo 10 miles east of Conrad, Montana in 2020 on July 2nd. As you can see there, that winter canola plant has basically already made up its mind in terms of total yield. It's probably going to finish here the last couple weeks of that crop. But on the other side of that county road, you can see that spring canola was just getting into the early stages of its flowering. So talking winter canola versus spring canola, beating the stress load of that season, being able to take advantage of the early season soil moisture and early season rain precip as well. I have a lot of comparison pictures here. Steve, I actually took this from your farm here a handful of years ago. This was out of Chinook, May 26th. There was a spring canola crop planted on this farm, as you can see, a couple weeks prior. Seeing the winter canola off in the distance. We went and took a picture out there as well. As you can see, that winter canola is into full bloom. Again, early season, trying to beat the stress. We've seen it start flowering as early as the first part of May. Other pictures over the years, all across Montana, I can say we successfully have grown winter canola from Chinook to Cup Bank, all the way south to Three Forks, all the way east is into Circle, Montana. Just a handful of pictures showing you early in the spring in that flowering period. Again, more pictures. I'd say the bulk of winter canola that's been raised in Montana in the Golden Triangle has been that Fort Benton to Big Sandy area. So again, more university data. I apologize, doctor, for putting university data in a lot of these slides. This is all I got to work from. So when I can start sending you this, and you can start feeding it back. But this is 20 years of data utilizing the university data of just comparing in their variety trials, spring canola versus winter canola. That's a big spring wheat area as long as winter wheat area as well. But as you can see, there's almost a 2,000 pound difference just by going from a winter canola crop at 4,500 pound average going to a spring canola at 2,500 pound average. So just showing the benefits of going to that winter canola crop versus spring. So where do the economics line up at? Last week, I tried to pull as much information as I could. So as I said, this is a small crop in the US. There hasn't been a lot of money funding research for winter canola. The universities are basically what we've relied on here the last several years. So Oklahoma State, again, one of the founding states that raised winter canola, had done research since 2013, and the average price between winter wheat and canola was about $1.16 to $3.15 per bushel. So I pulled the price last week, February 10th. December delivery for 2026 was $11.38 a bushel. I pulled a Montana futures price for 2026 at 402, almost $7.81 more per bushel value for winter canola versus winter wheat. So with that, using Oklahoma State data as well, expenses going into winter wheat versus winter canola, over the time period since 2013, you almost have $165 an acre invested into winter wheat. That's including seed, chem, fuel, harvest, and hauling, versus $210 an acre for winter canola. So as you'd figure, inputs are going to be a little bit more increased, seed costs a little bit more increased when you start talking canola. Very busy slide. I won't show a lot of data slides, but this is just showing you a cost comparison per acre of raising winter canola versus winter wheat. And then that talking about that 80% to 75% yield, that of canola, that of winter wheat. So as you figure all the way through, 10 bushel to 50 bushel, 13 of canola, 13 bushel to 50 bushel of winter wheat, and what those inputs would do. So very small, busy slide, but break even today for $11 canola is almost 20 bushel. Let's call it 18 bushels per acre. Averages, I'd say in the triangle for producers that have been raising it here the last 10 years have been averaging around 40 to 50. So if you look at true nets per acre, anywhere from $230 to $340 per acre nets. And we've had guys as high as 70 bushels per acre. That's a pretty darn profitable crop when you actually look at the economics, especially for 2026. So, how to raise it? The 4 easy steps. And I can tell you, the first time you raise canola is always, winter canola is going to be your first most challenging. If you do the right steps, the right time, the success level goes from 50-50 to almost 100% if you follow these quick, easy steps. So seed timing. We want canola planted 6 to 8 weeks before your first killing frost. I know, the last 2 years our killing frost has been probably the middle of November, but going off our average frost day, I'm going to utilize Great Falls, Montana. A lot of winter canola acres been growing there. Average frost date for Great Falls, Montana is September 15th. So do the quick math, 6 to 8 weeks before that. Where does that put you? August 1st to August 15th is when you need to be planting that canola. I was actually in the Dutton Cafe a handful of years ago with a couple of growers, and we were trying to talk about winter canola being an option. And they laughed when I said, you need to be in the drill, have a drill ready August 1st to be planting winter canola. And they said, do you expect me to take someone off a harvest crew to put them in the grain or into the grain drill to be planting winter canola? Well, today, that grower is now successfully growing winter canola and understands that timing is everything when you raise winter canola. So why do we want to grow it or need to plant it 6 to 8 weeks before a first killing frost? We want that plant about the size of a dinner platter, which is about 6 to 8 leaves going into the winter, to have enough size and scale to make sure it's going to survive the winter. If we try to plant winter canola when we plant winter wheat, we're going to have 1 to 2 leaf canola, and it's not going to have the energy to be able to survive the winter. So seeding conditions. You absolutely must seed into moisture when you are going after or planting winter canola. A lot of times we get hung up on rule number 1 on a timing scale, and we plant it in the dirt and we put it into dark brown dry soil, and that seed can't germinate and get up and going. You have got to seed it into good soil conditions, good seed to soil contact, but always moisture. One thing with canola is a very small seeded crop. You figure there's about 100,000 seeds per pound. It's very small. There's not a lot of energy in that small seed. So in spring canola, you always want to seed it very shallow, because we know it doesn't like cold soils. It has not a lot of energy. But with winter canola, our soil temperatures are probably around 70 degrees, sometimes 80 degrees when we're talking August. Well, if there's moisture, you can seed that canola up to 2 inches, 2.5 inches, as long as there's moisture there and there's enough warmth in that soil that seed can come up and get going. So always seed it into moisture. Low residue always wins. I can tell you chem fallow always wins over recrop. So in a condition that we're going into this year, if you're thinking about winter canola, try to please, if you're a first-time winter canola grower, place it on the fallow acre versus putting it on recrop. We do have moisture in that fallow. We won't have a lot of residue versus going recrop. Variety selection, just make darn sure you have a proven variety that's grown in your area that has winter hardiness. Seeding rate, you're only going to be seeding it about 3 to 4 pounds per acre. Like you said, we want to see that 350 to 400,000. There's about 100,000 seeds per pound. So correct seeding conditions, this was out of Geraldine, Montana in 2018. As you can see, this was on a chem fallow block. Picture on the left, a few weeks after planting. Very good emergence, good seed to soil contact. Came back another week later, 10 days later. You can see that that's the right size of winter canola there on the right that I want to see going into winter. Almost 100% of the time, you're going to have a good winter survivability and have a crop come that next year. Planting depth, like I said, good seed to soil contact, not a lot of residue. This was a picture I pulled of a plant out of Brady, Montana. Seeing that seed coating there in the middle, about inch and a half deep. Does residue management have any effect with winter canola? So canola is very, very light sensitive. We want that seed to germinate in the soil and emerge in the soil. If it germinates in a bunch of tough, you got a lot of trash there, let's say you have a chaff row, it's going to travel, that hypocotyl, they call it, will travel all the way through that trash and it'll open up its cotyledons above that trash. And what it does is, and I'll show it in a second, a hypocotyl that makes it very susceptible to winter kill. So this is an absolute no-no. Where I talked about those cotyledons will open up and emerge out at sunlight. In this essence, you can see those small seedlings got put in a chaff row and emerging at that light. Well, the very first time you guys get sub-zero temperatures, 100% of those crops, that growing point's going to be dead. And then I get the call to come out and look at that crop that looks like that. At every 40 feet, we don't have a stand. So seed to soil contact is very, very important. I can pick on them. Jake Waldner at the time, that was at Pleasant Valley Colony, he had this field right here on the top left. And it was an eyesore, but we knew how much yield potential actually was everywhere else outside of that windrow. And that field averaged 52 bushel. Where every single 40 feet was a weedy mess and opened up like that. So seed to soil contact is very, very important. Again, just showing you where that seed, that's where that stem, if you will, between the seed and the cotyledons is a hypocotyl. The very first time that you get a hard frost, it'll pinch off that stem, if you will, that hypocotyl, and cause winter kill. Stripper stubble, I'm indifferent on it. I know it's a lot of producers think it's super sexy right now. With canola, it absolutely is not, both spring and winter canola. Can it be done? Yes. That picture on the left was on a farm out at Geraldine a handful of years ago. The problem I have with stripper stubble is the picture on the right, everywhere that you have equipment traffic that's going on it. Headlands, headrows, where all that trash is matted down. And we're trying to get a drill to go through there. So when we start talking about equipment of sowing in winter canola, I prefer a hoe drill versus a disc drill. Same thing, you have very, very good seed to soil contact with a hoe drill. You're able to actually even keep a microclimate with that furrow, protect those crowns of that plant versus a disc drill where you're going to keep those plants emerged on top of the soil. That keeps them exposed to the winter as well. Anybody using planters? Did we get over that rave that was in Fort Benton area? Everybody's using planters for about 2 years. Anybody still using planters? Corn planters, bean planters? No? Perfect. Most, again, sorry, Doc, the university data says anything over 15-inch spacing, you actually start losing yield potential. You can lose over 10% yield potential when you start going to a 22-inch planter or 30-inch planter versus your 7 to 15-inch. Fertility, sorry, synthetic fertilizers. At the end of the day, I don't care if you're using manure, you're using mushrooms or synthetic fertility. Canola needs fertility. It's a fertility-loving crop. It is a good scavenger with its taproot as well, but as you can see here, it does require a lot of nitrogen, a lot of sulfur. It can mineralize and utilize a lot of the phosphorus and potassium in those soils as well, but do not limit it on nutrition. Canola can have, like you say, that 250 bushel yield opportunity. Canola can do the same thing, and I always see a lot of producers starve this crop when they looks like they have a 50 bushel crop and they come into it that's 30 bushel. A lot of times we are starving it on fertility. We don't have the dirty soils or the dirty air that we had 20 years ago. The Clean Air Act of the 1990s cleaned up a lot of our sulfur in the air, and we're starting to see a lot of sulfur deficiencies show up in canola, so make darn sure whatever nutrient source that you guys are sourcing for sulfur, feed plenty of sulfur on that crop. pHs, like a neutral to higher pH versus those pHs of 5s or lower. Herbicide systems with winter canola, there are your conventional varieties that you can use, limited on your grass control, but more so limited on your broadleaf control, but you also have Roundup Ready varieties for you for management options as well. Canola is a very sensitive crop to long-lasting soil residues, so know what your crop rotation or your herbicide rotation is on your acres. So here's some of the problematic herbicide groups, group 2s, group 4s, so Pursuit, Beyond. I don't know if a lot of Ally Glean gets used anymore, but Olympus still does. Dicamba, Metribuzin, Spartan, and Valor I know are very popular anymore, especially with our pulse crop rotations, and some of you are using them in chem fallow as well. Keep an eye on them when you are applying them, especially in your fallow or the crop prior to planting winter canola. Again, some more wheat herbicides, Osprey, Powerflex, Zidua, and some of your pulse crop common herbicides, Pursuit, Prowl, Spartan, Authority, Husky, Star Rain, very sensitive. So basically every tool that you guys use for weed control in your small grains can be volatile for sensitive for winter canola production, so keep an eye on it. One thing with winter canola is always say, be patient and be committed. This is a friend of mine that was east of Conrad a handful of years ago in 2020, and I went out there on April 28th, and this is how that field looked. And as you can imagine, when they're doing the 60-mile-an-hour drive-by, it looks pretty darn tough. And trust me, this is a friend of mine that I heard about it every single week until he ended up cutting that crop. And now 5 years later, I still hear about it. But always say, be patient, be committed. So if you guys can see at any of those pictures, there is some green out here. So you actually had to stop and get out and look at this field. If you remember, it was a pretty darn cold, dry spring, and it seems like that's been the last several springs that we've had. But if you actually went out there and found the row and you brushed away the top of that soil, all those plants were there. So April 28th, we typically have most of our decisions made or have our spring crop planted, if you will. And of course, they were getting at the end of planting their spring canola, their spring wheat on April 28th, and they'll have a crop. And I'm trying to convince them to keep this crop in there. This is the same field. I'll go back. You can see those power lines on the top leftish, if you will. You see that county road there. Come back. There again, those power lines, that's on June 9th. You would have thought that on April 28th when you came out and looked at that crop, would you? Here, I didn't put the day down. I don't know what it was, but they ended up swathing this. They're running TR90s or TR95 New Holland Combines, they actually had a couple spots that did winter kill that had some kochia that come into them. Well, TR90s, those TR95s don't chew up kochia very well, so they ended up swathing all of this canola. I can say today almost 98% of the producers that raise winter canola all straight cut it. One neat thing about a winter crop is it doesn't have the variability. It beats the stress loads like I talked about earlier, so it's gonna ripen very, very evenly. So I would much rather you straight cut this crop versus swathing it. This was a special instance, but with that, this field ended up averaging 33 bushels per acre. Well, if any of you guys farm east of Conrad, Montana, and you're gonna plant spring canola on, let's say, May 1st, your yield opportunity was probably half of that. So always say, be patient, be committed. It will take care of you. If you had come spring, you had a plant or a crop that did have some winter kill, you can still make economical yield off of less than one plant per square foot. When I showed that picture earlier of a spring canola crop and a plant and a winter canola plant, a winter canola plant can make up a significant amount of area. If it does not have a lot of stress, you're feeding it, has good precipitation, it can make up a lot of yield on very, very few plants. Some other pictures over the years. I'm probably going way over time. This is what I want to see going into the fall. Again, in Fort Benton, 2021. This was in 2022, a conventional variety out of Great Falls. Three Forks, Montana, some more conventional varieties. This was Cody's first run at winter canola in 2022 up north of the highway of Kremlin. This was a Roundup Ready variety. This was in the springtime. You can see all that decayed, dead material there. That's actually all the foliage that it'll put on in the fall. We always say we don't want you to fertilize it and feed it too much going into the fall because all that vegetation that it grows, it's actually going to defoliate, and most of your nutrition is going to be tied up in organic matter at that point. But as you can see, it's recovering pretty well then. This was a sad but neat kind of situation. This was at Pleasant Valley Colony in 2023, and this was variety CP320. It's a Roundup Ready variety, and it's actually a fairly old variety. They actually put a pile of their lagoon water on this field. This is a perfect Terra New sale sequel right here because this was the most beautiful winter canola crop that I've ever seen in Montana. And I actually could probably say anywhere that I've touched winter canola. This crop, I'm in my pickup right now. This is a dryland field out of Belt, Montana, if you know where Pleasant Valley Colony is there. The pods of crop was actually hanging over. It was probably an 8-foot tall crop, but with the yield potential on this thing, it was really, really well. There's Peter right there. If any of you guys know Pat Doty, he just recently retired, standing out there. They're pretty ecstatic about it. Most of those pods were the size of a pencil, if you will. This thing was fed really, really well. A lot of nutrition, a lot of lagoon water. That ground had everything that it could even imagine. And look at this successful crop. Well, the sad news of that story is I called Peter the day that they were supposed to cut that, and they moved the combines to that field the night before in a hailstorm. If any of you know that Belt area, that bench, this was 100% wiped out. And that was probably close to 100 bushel per acre winter canola crop, dry land in Belt, Montana, that got 100% held out. So it was a very sad day, and it was one of the worst calls that I ever made, having to hear him say got held out that day or that night before. So here's some pictures just from this last fall. Circle, vegetation, those are the right size. Here's some of Cody Donovan's there, bottom right out of Geraldine. Some stuff irrigated crop this last fall out of Great Falls. I'm going to pick on these guys. First time grower in Dutton, Montana this fall. Like I said, 6 to 8 weeks before your first killing frost. August 15th, awesome time to seed. We got all that rain first part of August. This was in Chemfallow. They were seeding on August 15th. I believe we had the depth set at 2 inches is where we were going. Came back about a week later. You can see the cotyledons coming up from 2 inches deep. Don't think that drill had ever been set going that deep before in that country. September 17th, perfect size I want to see going into winter. If we got a hard killing frost on the average frost date, we're golden, we're good. So I went out there just last week just to follow up. You'd think, oh my goodness, that looks tough. Well, like I said, it defoliates all of its leaves over the course of the winter. Actually, 100% of those plants were still alive. So the biggest challenge with winter canola, the biggest risk in winter canola, if you do every step right, is the time now until spring. And we know that we get Chinooks here in the Front Range of Montana that warms up the ground. We've seen a lot of winter wheat in the last week that greened up. The biggest susceptible time is trying to keep that crop to bed until we actually hit spring. If we get a hard frost and this thing started really greening up and we put a leaf or two on, that can be a killing frost. When we hit those 80 degrees and then the next week it decides to get to single digits again, that's your risk in raising winter canola. If we get it from this stage to bolting and we get a hard frost in April, I'm not worried about it. It's an indeterminate crop. It's going to keep growing. It has growing points. It'll continue to go. The risk level is from right now until we get to that April, May time frame to manage those frosts. So a lot of different varieties. We aren't going to talk about that, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to grab me. Otherwise, thank you very much for rounding up the conversations.